John is joining us from the Office of Pennsylvania Attorney General, and he's going to be talking to us about financial scams and how to avoid them. So, John, I am making you our presenter now.
Good, great, good. So everyone should see my screen, and I'm going to make sure folks can see my screen. So, yes, thank you, Hillary, and thank you for asking us to be part of this presentation here this afternoon.
Thanks, John. You're welcome, and I am seeing your screen, so it's all looking good.
Good, great. Thank you. So what I want to do, I have a few moments here to speak with you about financial frauds and what we should be looking out for, what sort of red flags are out there. I'll kind of dive into sort of the nuts and bolts of the presentation, but I wanted to give just a quick overview on what is the Bureau of Consumer Protection, what do we do, how can it help you as a consumer, and what sort of resources we have available to help make sure the students are informed and the teachers are informed, and we have an informed consumer all over the state. The Consumer Protection Bureau has been around since the 1970s. Sometime during the late 60s and 70s, there was a real decided effort to have states and pass their own consumer protection laws, in Pennsylvania as well, passed their consumer protection law back in 1968. It basically had set forth a framework whereby businesses would be held accountable for their conduct. They could not engage in what we call unfair or deceptive acts or practices. So that's sort of the granddaddy law for the Bureau of Consumer Protection. It lists specifically certain conduct that will be deemed illegal. Some of those are going to be familiar to you: chain letters, bait and switch, some of the common frauds that we all come across. And that is the law that gives the Attorney General the authority to bring actions in the name of the public. So we have the legal authority to bring a lawsuit to achieve a number of different types of relief, including restitution, including penalties, and including what we call injunctive relief, which is very important, because if we see a business that is behaving illegally, we can get an injunction to make sure that they correct their business practices. We can fence in those business practices for future purposes. So one of the primary things we do are secure those types of legal actions to protect consumers. The other functions of the Bureau is we will mediate individual consumer complaints. So we have regional offices all throughout the state that are staffed by lawyers and agents and support staff. So if an individual has a problem with a local business or really any type of business, from the smallest to the very largest international companies, consumers are encouraged to file a consumer complaint online or in sort of the old-fashioned snail mail, and then that complaint gets opened up, and then the Bureau does seek to get that case resolved through mediation. We don't represent the lawyer in any sort of attorney-client sense, but we do work to try to get that complaint resolved satisfactorily. They're not always successful, but we do encourage folks that if they feel they've been wronged, that this is a place that they can turn to. Those complaints are important because they're often the lifeline or the lifeblood to investigation. So we have authority to conduct investigations. They are typically non-public, but if we think there's a potential wrongdoing, we can go out and gather more information. And if the investigation bears fruit, then we can take the kind of legal actions I talked about earlier on. We settle a number of cases outside of court, but we have a mechanism to do that, whereby the settlement agreement actually gets filed with the court and it becomes public knowledge. So we are a place where, as you do your homework and you're looking to different financial advisors or financial opportunities, we do encourage people to check with us to see if there's been a legal action of public record that might be able to guide the consumer as they decide whether or not to make a particular investment. The overlaying the entire Bureau, as I'm sure a lot of agencies are involved, but we do a significant amount of education and outreach. We have a whole host of brochures, public speaking opportunities that are available to go out and try to educate folks with the belief that, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So it's really the best defense to a lot of these financial frauds that I'm going to talk about is an informed and educated consumer. So that kind of wraps around everything that we do here in the consumer protection. We're housed within the Public Protection Division, and obviously at the very top would be the Attorney General, Josh Shapiro. Hang on just for 1 minute. I'm ready to move to the next slide, and we're trying to work out how to do that. So the next slide. So that's me. That's our current Attorney General, Josh Shapiro. So let me talk a little about financial fraud and how the information is obtained. That could come through a number of different ways. Sometimes that's done through email. Sometimes that's done through telephone calls to the consumer, a cold call. We do encourage consumers that they get onto the do not call list that's been around now for a number of years. So it does help to cut down on the number of unwanted calls that one might get. But really, there's a whole variety of ways that the fraudsters obtain the information. Email, phone calls. We actually have what we call dumpster divers. So they're folks that are going to go through the trash at a given business or a given location and round up the personal information there. One of the words of advice that we have for consumers that I'll allude to later on in the program is that you do want to make sure that you're properly disposing of anything that contains personal information, such as a shredder, so that information does not get into the wrong hands. But there's a whole wide variety of ways that people can actually get your information. So for that reason, you want to make sure that your information has rigorous passwords if it's something you're keeping at your computer, that you're shredding your information, that you're getting in the mail, or any paperwork that you're disposing of, that you're doing that. Again, this whole idea of the best defense against this is to arm yourself with the proper information so you can protect any of this personal identification information that's out there. Make sure it doesn't get out there. Unfortunately, there are a lot of folks out there that parlay in this kind of personal information. That you may get onto a list, and then that list kind of gets sold over and over again. So be very jealous about who you give out personal information to. I was thinking at the beginning of the presentation here, what are just a couple of bullet points? So I think it's always good to have just a few number of bullet points to walk away with. So something that you could keep in mind to protect yourself. And I think the first thing is, it's often said in the area of consumer protection that if it's too good to be true, it probably is. So, with financial fraud, financial investments, opportunities to get rich quick, so-called insider tips, or the email that you get that it's a limited time offer, you have to act now. There's some sort of pressure or time limit that the particular person is trying to put you under. They're all red flags. So, we all kind of have a good, common sense to us. And if there's an itch, or if you have a feeling in the gut that something about this just doesn't hold up, it just doesn't sound like that this is really going to be for real. If that's the voice inside your head, then that's a good sign to go the other way. So, just keep that in mind. If it's too good to be true, it likely is not true. It's going to be false. It's going to be a fraud. The second thing that I think I wanted to have people walk away from as I get through sort of the substance of the program is that you've got to do your homework. So as I said, if you are getting a pitch from a financial advisor or a financial opportunity, someone's asking to part with your hard-earned money with the expectation you're going to get some sort of return, do your homework. Check with this office for any legal actions. We also suggest you check with the Better Business Bureau as well. So you do want to be making sure you're checking all your references and that you're really making, again, an informed decision before you pay out money. So I think if that's two little nuggets you can walk away from after this afternoon, they're probably well worth it. That you do want to, do that legwork at the front end, find out what you can, make sure the company has a valid street address. I always think that's probably a good idea, better than a P.O. box. Some of these companies set up suite numbers. A suite number, you have this vision of, they got this whole elaborate office setup, but a suite number was often just either a mailbox at the post office, or it's a private mailbox. And then if it's a website, that's even worse, because there's sometimes there's no real live address, bricks and mortar location or physical address out there. So make sure that you know who you're dealing with. The third point that I wanted to mention that I think is a valuable takeaway is be wary if the pitch is coming to you. So if the opportunity is coming unsolicited, out of the blue, rather than you making the effort to outreach and do your homework and then seek out somebody. But usually, my personal experience has been that if the pitch comes to you, it will, that's a bit of a red flag. So that I think, are the three the biggies as we go through here. And a lot of that's based on my personal experience. I've been doing this for about 25 years. And what I wanted to do is share those with you. As I go through this program, it's not necessarily the official position of the Attorney General, but it is sort of, hopefully, something that can help you through the future. So here are a couple other bullet points that I think are very important as you go through this, as you go through these different frauds. So check and bank fraud, that might happen where we've seen counterfeit checks mailed in the mail. They are really just plain old counterfeit. So some of these fraudsters are really good at making a check look for real. So there'll be some sort of scheme in which maybe you're selling something or buying something on eBay. They'll send you back a check for more than the price of the particular good, and it looks like a real check. I mean, it's got a watermark. It walks, quacks. Does everything like you think it's a real live check. Walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, but it really is not a duck. It's a counterfeit check. And then the scheme goes through that, whereby, I put too much on the check. Can you deposit the check and then pay me back money, pay me cash money back? And then the check gets deposited, and then the consumer pays out the money, and ultimately it ends up being a counterfeit check. So that's one example of what I'm going to call bank fraud. Let me go back to investment scams as well. They're the ones, again, if they're coming to you in an email that you didn't ask. We probably have all seen by now the Nigerian oil scam email, where there's some sort of, foreign opportunity. And if that email is coming to you, don't reply. Don't do anything with except for, and just delete it right away. I would even counsel you not even to open up the email. So if it looks like, a spam, if it looks like someone you don't recognize, I wouldn't even spend the time of day on some of these emails to open them up. Phone scams, again, if the telephone call is coming to you, that's a red flag. Don't be afraid if you're not interested to hang up. It's unfortunate, but we find a lot of these scammers will target the elderly. They come from a time period where people were more, perhaps more polite, more civil, and they also have some reason to believe that elderly folks might have more money. But the do not call, getting on the do not call registry should help to cut down on those number of calls. But if it's a call that you don't expect, and you're not interested in, there's no reason why you can't simply say that and terminate the call. you'll see this slide here. Particularly you don't want to be giving out personal information to anyone who you don't know. Um, you know, a legitimate operation is not going to call you, is not going to send you an email to say, hey, listen, you have to go to this website and enter all this personal information, such as your credit card number or your account number. Um, all those things are red flags. So that's one way that the fraud comes to you, is through phones. E-scams, we talked already at some extent about the emails that are out there that come in that are unsolicited. The best thing to do with those emails is simply to delete them. There's no reason to open them or exchange it. From what I hear, if it gets opened up, it's sort of identified as a live email, so that they know somebody's on the other end of that email message. So your best bet is simply to completely get it out of your system, delete it from your trash bin as well, so there's no remnant of it. It's unfortunate, but these emails are still out there. We had the one from a few years ago that it was coming from Bill Gates, purportedly. There's still different varieties of the electronic scams that are out there. And people know it's one way that they can get people hooked. So stay away from those, particularly if they're coming to you and you're not soliciting that, you don't know who the person is. Don't give out any kind of personal financial information under any circumstance. Mail fraud, the good old mail fraud is still there, so to speak. You still have mailings that go out from time to time that encourage people to become involved in one investment or another. Again, if it's a piece of mail that you really don't know, or you're not familiar with the company, do your homework before you respond to any kind of offer through the mail. One of the type of financial frauds that we've seen here at the Attorney General's office in recent years, and they're still out there, is the so-called Ponzi scheme. So, and this comes through in a variety of shapes and sizes, but it really is something like a chain letter, but it is based on this notion that we call it pyramid. So what the pitch is essentially, you're going to bring in other members, and then they're going to bring other members, and then there's going to be a situation in which they all kind of share the wealth as more and more people get involved in the pyramid, or the so-called Ponzi scheme. And eventually the Ponzi schemes collapse, because in order for them to continue an operation, they have to kind of continue to bring in more and more victims. So if it looks like anything that's driven by further participation, you're called upon to bring new people in, you're called upon to bring in, recruit more people, to give money to kind of keep this operation alive. That's something you want to think long and hard about getting involved with. We see them, they pop up throughout the state from time to time. Some of them are what I'll call affinity fraud, so they might be directed to a certain ethnic population, or they might be directed to females, or they might have some sort of special niche that they're trying to capitalize upon. But there's always usually a few hallmarks about it, that its very existence depends on bringing in new recruits. We had some that then expressly said, don't use the U.S. mail. So when you mail the money back in, don't use U.S. mail. Use a private courier such as Federal Express or UPS or some other private courier service. And I always suspected that was a reason, because they didn't want to get nailed for U.S. mail fraud. And then they would say things like, don't send checks, don't send money orders, put it in cash and wrap it in an aluminum foil or Reynolds wrap, or wherever it is, and mail the cash in. So if you've got those type of the early warning signs, that's a good reason to to be careful about the Ponzi, the get rich quick, limited time. You have 24 hours to respond. Chance of a lifetime. all those things when we're talking about financial fraud are really, you got to be aware of those. Phishing, I talked about this momentarily before. So this is rather sophisticated. I mean, I'm sure the other panelists and other people here in the audience have seen these. So it is again an unsolicited email. You wake up in the morning, you fire up your laptop, and there's an email from a bank or insurance company, and it says, go to this website. And it certainly looks like an official website. I mean, it is really close to looking like it. If you really spend some time kind of reading through it word by word, you may well find some typos. You may well find some misspellings here and there. But for the most part, it's going to look legit. And then that website will ask you to submit information of a personal nature, usually under the pretense that, we saw some account activity, we need to update our records, kind of go in here and enter what information they're asking for. So, that's still around. That is still alive and kicking. We get calls on that, from consumers. We'll do what we can to try to track down the perpetrators of these kind of frauds. Sometimes they're offshore, but it is always helpful to, if you see that out there, to go ahead and report it to the Bureau of Consumer Protection. So this is one that next is, you've seen that, and you've seen the IRS scam. You've seen telephone calls for people claiming they're from the IRS. They have to pay money. They have to pay money now. We've got a number of different advisories on our website about that. But typically that's not how the IRS is going to be doing business, by cold calling somebody. This is something you're going to see, for the next couple months as we approach the magic date of April 15th. But again, if the call is going to you and someone's calling your house and demanding payment or threatening arrest, and purportedly on behalf of the IRS, you've got to be real leery about following through on that. In that respect, report it here, report to the IRS if you're getting these kind of these IRS scam calls. So I think I've got a few minutes left here. Let me try to recap some of the things that I wanted to talk about. Never give out that personal information. And never provide banking or credit card numbers to someone who you do not know. Never complete unsolicited surveys. That's another way they pretend to be taking some sort of survey for whatever purpose there might be. Talk real quickly about donations. You're going to get pitches that are really rather persuasive, and our recommendation is make sure you verify the charity. You can call the Department of State in Pennsylvania here. You can call the Better Business Bureau. They have a service called Navigator that will help folks decide what sort of background they can get on the so-called charity. The issue here is always how much of the money is actually going to the charity versus administrative expenses. That would seem to us to be always a good question to ask before you start to give to a charity. Never trust a caller ID display. So let me explain that a little bit there. So what we have here is spoofing. So the phone will ring and it'll look like a local number, but essentially the fraudsters will so-called rent these numbers, and they may actually not be local at all. So you might think it's an area code 717 for folks here in Harrisburg and central Pennsylvania. That number is really kind of a spoofed number, and you're not going to be able to rely on that number to track back to get the person who actually made the call. They'll use those numbers for a while, and then those numbers essentially will go away. So I know a lot of us have caller ID display, but you want to be real leery about trusting that. So then this last one's really important. Never withdraw cash and wire to a stranger. It happens. We get calls on it. A lot of the stories are rather heartbreaking because you will get the person, and it's usually by phone. It usually starts by phone. It might be a letter in the mail. But, this is, you've won the foreign lottery, the grandparent scam where someone calls pretending to be a grandchild and says, listen, I'm in trouble, grandma or grandpa. I was here on Europe on my trip, my overseas trip at college, and I need some money to get wired because of a problem with the local authorities. And then, sure enough, the person goes down to the money transmitter and wires that money. And it's always very difficult to pull that money back once it goes out. So you got to be extremely careful who you're wiring the money to. Don't wire it to a stranger under any particular circumstance. Never pay for taxes or fees from an advanced check in hopes of a larger payout later. That's sort of the counterfeit check I talked about earlier. Skimmer devices, I just wanted to talk about that for a minute. So these are skimmers. You can see they're handheld. They could be actually something you can hold in practically the palm of your hand and stick in your pocket, or they could be actually mounted on an ATM, or we've heard of them being mounted on gas pumps. So be on the lookout for something that looks like an extra contraption, so to speak, in front of the ATM or in front of the gas pump, because they can slide that card and get your personal information. The one bit of advice that we do get people to make sure they haven't fallen to financial fraud is to get this annual credit report. That's the site to go to. That is the official FTC site. There's a couple that are close that look like that, but that's the one you want to go to, because there's some that are, they sound like it, but some of them actually enroll you in a paid program. This is absolutely free, and that's how you get a hold of your annual credit report that you can look at to make sure there's nothing strange or suspicious that showed up on your credit report. Talked about shredding unsolicited offers. Monthly statements, go through those to make sure you haven't been the victim of financial fraud. There's a phone number that you can call. It's a private service, but it allows you to cut down on the mailings you get with the credit card offers. I talked about earlier about trying to use some complex pins rather than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then they were talking about getting your annual credit report to make sure nothing's untoward on there. So lastly, there's our contact information, that you can call there to get a complaint form, to submit a complaint form, or you can go to that website down at the bottom right-hand corner to submit your complaints online. We're available here. You'll get a live person that can answer your questions, that can put you in the right direction. And again, that's really, a real important phone number to write down, because there's a lot of things we can do to help consumers to avoid financial fraud. And I think that about wraps it up for me, Hillary.
Great, John. I did get a couple of questions that came in, if you have a second to answer those.
Oh, sure.
The first one is, actually we got it from a couple of folks, and that is, they've heard, and I've even seen these reports of the scam floating around social media, this notion of folks sort of saying, can you hear me now, and then recording your voice when you say yes. Is that something that your office has heard anything about? Is that a verified scam that's going on, something we should be worried about?
So you're telling me that the scam is that they're on social media.
Well, the word about it has come around on social media, but as I understand it,
okay,
the scam is such that the person calls you and says, "Can you hear me now?" And when you say yes, they record you saying yes and sort of capture your yes to
Oh,
use it
capture
again.
your voice.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Not myself personally, but I wouldn't be surprised if that came through here, whereby somebody is calling you saying, "Can you hear me?" And they answer yes. Record the voice, and now now they've got your voice. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I have never uh, you know, taken back or at the least bit surprised in terms of what the next scam is or what sort of ingenuity people are putting in to further defraud people. Um, so personally, I haven't heard that, but I think I'll certainly look into that. It may well be that we've got that through those complaints through other avenues here in our office.
One other question before we move on. One of our participants wondered, percentage-wise, how has financial fraud increased in your 25 years of experience there?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, thanks. That's a good question. I would say I think overall the dollar values. I would say just kind of a shorthand impression. I think the dollar values have gone up. I mean, the losses that I've personally seen have continued to mount. Um, you know, we continue to kind of fight the good fight. Um, but it does seem like sometimes it's like that whack-a-mole. You cut off one fraud in one forum, and then sure enough, another one pops up. So we're vigilant. We're out there fighting, but I would say overall, the dollars continue to increase. The people are losing.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate it and appreciate your time and your
Sure.
ability to join us here this afternoon.